This video is sponsored by Game Toppers. Turn your own kitchen or dining room table into a premium portable game solution at a fraction of the cost. Hey everybody, welcome to Drive Thru Review 761. Today we're going to talk about Catherine, the Cities of the Tsarina. And so what this is a 2 to 4 player abstract game set during kind of the time of sort of the tail end of the Russian Empire before it became Soviet Union. And so what players are going to be doing is playing cards into a tableau in front of them and using kind of these different combos and interactions, which I'll show you down on the board here, to kind of spread out different kind of routes, collect little resource tokens, get kind of favors and different tracks and things like that, and then kind of re-interact and combo with some of the cards that they have in front of them, and then try to score the most points over the course of a couple of rounds. So let's go down to the table, I'll explain to you how it works, and I'll come back and tell you what I think. Okay, so here is the game board, which I've set up for 4 players, although nothing really changes too much based on player count in terms of the setup for this game. So a couple of things to note here is you have these different various cities here out on the board, and then you will have a number of these resource tokens on each city equal to the number of players. So in a 4-player game, you have 1 for each player. And you'll notice there are spots here around these different cities for players to put their little houses here, which we'll talk about how that happens. But you'll never put more than 1 house in a city, and when you put a house out here, when you do a building there, you take one of those resource tokens and put it in front of you, and you kind of collect these for different sort of things that you can combo with, as well as for end-game scoring. But again, you'll never take more than 1. And there's other ones out here that you'll score points for during little scoring rounds, and then here you will have places to build to go up the favor track, which we'll look at now. So whenever you build a building out there, or maybe activate some action here that shows that, you will start to move your little marker up here up the favor track. And there's a couple of things to note about that. So you can see there's kind of like 3 numbers, so we'll zoom in there. So here, the left number will show you your maximum hand size. Normally you have a hand size of 3, but in this case the yellow players moved up to here, so they now have a maximum hand size of 5. The next number is the amount of points you will score during some of the scoring rounds. So this is just a flat number of points that you score. And then the right hand number, which in this case is still 0, is going to be a big multiplier at the end of the game for your largest contiguous route of buildings there. So as you can see, as you move up to the top there, it starts to go up quite a bit. So you have 2, 3, and 4. So you'll basically at the end of the game multiply this number wherever you're out on the track with your largest route, and then that's add some points to the game. And of course there's a score track around the side, which will score points and little bonuses for every time you do a loop around the track. So other than all of this stuff out here, the game largely takes place in front of the players with their display of cards. Now over the course of the game, and even to start the game, you're going to have 2 rows of cards here. You've got your action row on top and your activation row on the bottom. And if I forget to mention this in the review, I'm going to mention it now. I really hate how they call this the action row and then the activation row. Those words are too close to each other. They should have come up with some other term. Because if you're trying to explain the game, they're like, which one's the action row? Which one's the activation row? So the way that to remember it is you activate with the cards that you play on the bottom, and they're activating and taking the action of the one on top. Okay. So what you're going to do is you're going to get a hand of 6 of these cards to start. You also will get 2 of these cards, and you'll choose one here, and these it's going to give you some end game bonuses here. So you can see these resources here match those resource tiles which I showed you on the board earlier. And so if you collect over the course of the game a certain number, so 5, 6, or 7 of the resources shown here, you will score 5, 8, or 12 points. And so they're just different ones there. And these are just a little end game bonus scoring there. So you get one of those to start the game, and then 6 cards. You'll take 3 cards and decide to put those in your top row, your action row. This is the actions you're trying to take, the actions on this card, and then activate them with cards underneath. So then you'll have 3 cards left in your hand, and then you're going to play 3 rounds with 4 sort of action rounds in between. So 3 larger rounds, each with 4 actions. You're always going to end up with 7 cards here, right? And so because over the course of the different action rounds you're going to take, you're always going to play 1 card up here and then 1 card down here into the activation row. Okay, so you're going to do that. So over the course of 4 of these, you'll have 7 across the top. and then you're going to delete some cards, and you'll be back down to 3, and you're going to do it again. You do that 3 times. So a total of just basically 12 turns over the course of the game. So the way that it's going to work is you're always going to draw, start with 3 cards, draw 2, put them into your hand. And all of these things happen simultaneously. Everybody does each of these kind of phases simultaneously. So simultaneously, everybody's going to draw 2 cards. And then everybody's going to take and put, let's say, I'll just do this randomly, 2 cards like this, face down. Everybody kind of decides that. When everybody's done, we're going to reveal the cards, because you always will put 1 on the top row and 1 on the bottom row. And if the card that you played in your bottom row, in your activation row, is the same color as the one above it in your action row, the bottom card will activate the action on your top card. And so everybody can take that action simultaneously, because like I said, there's no, erasing of somebody's position here. Everybody has a spot at the table at each of the cities. Everybody has a spot at the table to grab one of each of the resources there. And then, there might be some other actions here to draw cards, but you can kind of just do that simultaneously. So you're going to do that 4 times. And then at the end here, let's just kind of zoom out. So we're going to have, let's say, 1 here. I'm just going to do this randomly. So we're on the second one, and then 1 here, the third one, and then finally again there. So we'll have done our 4 rounds. Anything that we have a card underneath, and again, you do not have to match if you don't want to, then you're going to take and discard all of these, right? So these are all the ones theoretically we've activated. So we have 3 left. We suck these back down to the left here, and then we go again. So we're going to keep playing top and bottom 4 times. And then we're going to do that whole process 3 times and then score. Now, each time you do that, after you've played your 4th turn there is going to be interim scoring. So you're going to play 4 turns, score, 4 turns, score, 4 turns, score, and then have some final scoring. So now I'm going to talk about how you score, and then we're going to work through some of the cards and what the actions are that those cards do that help you score. Because one thing is, it's a pretty icon heavy game. That's not too bad, there's a lot of different kind of things. There's a nice kind of aid here at the back of the rule book here, kind of this 1.5 pages that really covers all of the icons. It's not a lot, but it's a little bit to take in, on your first couple of turns in the game. So let's look at how you actually score. So the first thing you're going to score in the first interim scoring round is you're going to compare cannons. So you're going to look at all the cannons on the tops of these cards, right? So the tops of these cards that are in your top row, if it's in your bottom row, ignore that card completely, other than the color when you played it to activate the top one. Again, if this matches the color, then you get to do whatever action is on here. We'll talk about that in a minute. But otherwise, completely ignore the card. So when we get to scoring, we're going to compare cannons with our neighbors. Now, in a 2-player game, you're just going to compare with each other. In a multiplayer game, you're going to compare with your neighbor to the left and to the right. And so if the neighbor to my left has fewer cannons than me, I will get 4 points. If the neighbor to my right has more cannons than me, they will get 4 points. And if I'm tied with either of them, they will each get 2 points. So it's kind of like 7 Wonders if you played that with the military. You're kind of comparing your military in this case. And so if you have more than the person to your left or right, you get 4 points in both cases. If you're tied, 2, and if you're less, 0. Next thing you're going to compare are these books here. And so when you're going to compare those books, you're going to compare it to all of the players on the board. And the player that has the most books is going to be able to build one of these cities out here anywhere that they want for free. And again, you're trying to kind of build a contiguous route, and then also again collect the resources out there that match up with the end game bonus card that you selected. So you're kind of considering those 2 things, the routes and then the bonuses. So maybe I'll just throw this out here. If I was had the most books, I'll collect that resource, just put it off to the side next to me, and then I've built this building and started my route out a little bit. Now, if multiple players are tied for most, then all of us get to do that. If you have the least amount of books, you don't get anything, but if you're somewhere in between the least and the most, then you get this sort of joker token, this wildcard token, which can count as a resource only at the end of the game for this card. So it doesn't count as a resource for anything else that I'm going to show you, just for this. So if you don't quite get to first place on the books, then you at least get kind of a consolation sort of wild card to use at the end of the game. And then the next thing you're going to do is anybody that has little houses on any of these cities that have the little 1 point thing, they're going to score a point for each one that they have. You're then going to score the points here for moving up this track. So again, this is very important for increasing your hand size, scoring more points during these interim scorings, and again, for the largest kind of route thing that you have at the end of the game. And then once you've scored that, then again, you're going to go down to your display here, clean those up. And then at the end of the first and the second rounds, everybody's going to draw 2 cards. And then of course, at the end of the third round, you're going to do final scoring. Now it's worth noting that in this case, when you draw these 2 cards at the end of the interim scoring, if you go above your hand limit, you don't draw any extra cards, but you get a victory point immediately on the victory point track for each card that you draw that goes above your hand limit. And that goes for all card drawing during the course of the game, except for one instance. And again, that's the thing where everybody draws 2 to start each turn, and then we'll decide 2 to play from our hand. Those 2 there, you can go above your hand limit for that instant because immediately you're going to play 2. But anytime any card effects down here or that interim scoring or anything like that, where you draw cards and it goes above your hand limit, you actually get victory points, which can be part of your strategy, which we'll talk about in a minute. Now, before we get into some more specifics with the cards, I just want to talk about end of game scoring. So you will score points for each card in your hand. You get 1 point for that. You score for your end game order card here, again, which, like I showed you, based on the number of goods you've collected. And then again, you take your largest route, multiply that by the number on the right of the favor track here, and then you add that to whatever victory points you have accrued during the game, and then whoever has the most points is the winner. So let's just take a couple of examples of cards, because there's a lot of variety in terms of what the cards do, because there's just a large stack of cards, and just little nuances of how these work. But there's not a lot of icons. Like I said, it's basically like a page and a half, maybe just over a page of these explanations here, and it gets pretty self-explanatory once you go. So again, when you reveal your 2 cards here, bam, bam, so we revealed that one and then this one, then if the card under here matches, then you get to activate that card. Now, on the tops of the cards, you don't really worry too much about that during the action phase. Again, that's usually for counting these icons like the books, the cannons, some of these resources which will come into play, which I'll talk about in a second. The bottom part of the card is what you're usually considered for the action. And so you kind of have like 2 parts to some of these actions. So you kind of have like the main action and then the bonus part. Now, for some reason, if you play the card here and you don't want to do the action, or you place it under a card that doesn't match, instead, you can draw a card. Because, I don't know, that doesn't happen very often, but sometimes. But most of the time, you're able to perform the action. And the real crux of the game is trying to look at the kind of the hand of cards you have and figure out, you know, do I want to use this to activate something else? Do I want to activate it, or what? Or maybe I can let it sleep over here and then hopefully draw another yellow card to activate later because I really want to activate this one, and so on. So that's the real kind of the crux of the game. So for example here, let's do this one. So we do this and say we look at the tokens that we have. So if we have 1 of each token, we can get 4 points. And we can do this as many times as we have a set of each token. Now when you go to look at like what you have to satisfy an action, like do I have all the requirements to satisfy this? You'll look at, again, only the top cards in your row, because again, the bottom ones you totally ignore other than the color. And you can see, okay, I've already got 2, 3 of these different tokens, but maybe I have the other one that I've collected from building a city on the board. So in this case, oh bang, 4 points, easy. Now if I had multiple sets, the top parts of these are considered like the main action. If I can satisfy that multiple times, with this, you can see it with the little black arrow there, then I can score, you know, 4, 8, 12 points theoretically. Then, because I was able to do the action, I chose to do the action, then I can do the bonus. The bonuses you can only do once. So in this case, it's discard a card from my hand, and then I can go up here, you know, on the favor track 1 step. So here I could draw 2 cards. If I have 3 books, that again, you only look at the top cards. So if I counted the books here, which I don't have 3 books, I only got 2, then I can go up 2 spaces. Here I can score 3 points, and then one time I can discard a card and score 4. Here I can go and actually build in one of these green cities. So I can go to St. Petersburg, Revel, or Novgorod and build there. And so they're kind of color coded. So that's another way you can get buildings out. And you go look there, and then the bonus I can do once, I can have 2 books and then go up on the favor track. And just a couple other examples like this one here, I can discard 2 cards. This means I can do it once. And then I can build building in one of the yellow spaces on the board. And then if I have 2 of these, I can go up there. Or like this one here, this one you can kind of compound on. So you can say if I have, for each one of either of these I had, I can draw a card. So you can theoretically have a lot of cards. This card already has 2 on there, and I've got some more here, and then maybe this one here, so I could draw a couple of cards that way. Well, you might want to do that because if you discard 3 cards, again, you can do this once, you get 10 points. If those 3 cards match color, you can also go up on that. And so you can get some card draw generating cards in here. And again, for each card that you draw over your hand limit, that gets you points. And so I've played games where I've gotten a lot of points doing that. But that's really kind of the basics of the rules of the game, is everybody's kind of simultaneously playing these cards, activating their actions, getting buildings out here on their routes, going up the favorite track to try to combo that stuff up, collecting the different resources from the different places, again, which will interact with some of the cards and their actions on there and give you bonuses at the end of the game. And it's just a real quick kind of game in that regard. You play that 3 turns, 3 rounds, and then you score it up and see who won. Okay, so that is Catherine. Let's go through my 3 pillars of review. First, we'll talk about player count. I've only played this 2 and 3 player. Haven't had a chance to play it with 4. I would say I don't really have a preference with 2 or 3 player. I can kind of lean 2 player. I don't really know why, but it has a kind of a nice back and forth with 2 players. But that's just under 3 players, and I don't see why I would have a problem with the 4 players, because let's look at the playtime. This is 30 to 45 minutes, and that is definitely true. I think 4 players, new players and stuff, it might take about an hour. But because all the turns are basically simultaneous, not basically, they are simultaneous, it shouldn't really matter the difference in playtime between 2 and 4 players that much. I mean, you have extra heads at the table, so somebody's going to be doing some extra thinking, so it's going to take a little bit extra time. I would say it's tricky because the first 2-player game I would say I played took about as long as this first 3-player game, but the second 2-player game that I played was way quick. I mean, it was definitely a half an hour. So it's not really going to matter. The play count doesn't really matter. There's not any stealing from people. It's a low interaction game for sure. The only real kind of direct interaction is it's kind of a race to do different things. So there's interaction there for sure. I mean, you can't just undersell that. And then you have the canon and book comparison, which is a Seven Wonders style sort of neighbor left-right comparison of the military and science or whatever. And that is interactive. That does factor into some of the decision making that you have to do, because you're trying to worm your way through all of the possible things that these cards can do. And so let's get to my 3rd pillar, is what is this game like? Well, superficially, it's very like a San Juan Race for the Galaxy, whatever kind of multi-use card game, on a superficial level. Kind of reminds me of St. Petersburg. I think some of that has to do with they're both set in Russia, and they both have cards, but St. Petersburg is this total economic thing. This is not really like that. This is really cool, though. I really do like this game because the cards have so much kind of going on with them that you're like, oh my God, what am I supposed to do here? Do I want to activate? Which of these cards do I want to activate first of all? And you kind of want to activate all of them. And it's okay, I really want to activate this one now, but I want to activate this one later. So what you can do, though, is it's a neat kind of thing, is you can play, you're okay, I'm going to activate this other one over here that it's already down. And I'll stick this one over on the right and wait for it until I can kind of get some cards. And then I can get myself into a better kind of hand position to have a little bit better choice of what I want to do. Make my choices a little bit more optimal so I can really set myself up to have, a good choice in either direction that I take. And it's just really cool because it's hard to explain because it's very abstract, okay? And I feel like this is a game that probably would have come out 10, 15 years ago and been really heralded and touted and that kind of stuff, because it just has this really cool combo-rific kind of stuff. Now nowadays I can almost hear the voices in my head out there on some of the internet critics and some of the other reviewers and stuff, well, there's no interaction really, it's a bunch of icons and combos and stuff like that, and it doesn't have this, it doesn't have this other check mark that it ticks, you know, with like, you know, social interaction or something on a game, and I'm like, I don't know, that this is great because it feels like a breath of like old fresh air that, you know, like I'm like, oh, I remember when games were like this. And it kind of has, it's like a throwback vibe, and I really like it for that, because sometimes, and this is, I got to kind of caveat this a little bit, because it's something that I really particularly personally enjoy. I love a good hand of cards. I love a good, like, oh crap, like what order do I play these in, you know? And if I do this, and like invariably you play something, you're like, oh, that's good, and then like 5 seconds later you're like, oh no, I shouldn't have did that. And it's like the whole game is full of that. And the game, it's definitely a less than an hour game, but it somehow feels like a more crunchy, kind of full, epic kind of game that would, you know, normally take like 2 hours or so. So it kind of packs a lot into that, and there's just a lot of stuff tugging at you. You're like, okay, I'm trying to get the most books, get the most cannons, start to, you know, I got to work on my route, so I got to start building stuff. But holy cow, I can really generate a lot of points, you know, especially towards kind of the end of the game, when you have access to a lot more of these different tokens and stuff that will trigger not only in your card row, but you gather those tokens to get the end game kind of order bonus card, but those tokens will trigger off extra abilities on your card. So you really want to do that. So in the last one, you're like, I'm going to draw 10 cards or something. And it's like, and you know, your hand limit's going to be way under that, so you just get a bunch of points. And so it becomes a real kind of fun balancing act to, you know, figure out where your optimal point stuff is. But it doesn't feel like point salady or anything. It's like, okay, you get points from extra cards, you get points from the routes, you know, you get points from the cards that say, here's some points. And that's it, you know. So it feels like an old school kind of thing where you're just really at home and you just kind of sit in there with that whole multi-use card thing, and it's just a fun little juggling act. And there's not any, like, nobody's punching you in the face, you know, no, you know, in terms of like the gameplay where you're like, you're getting stuff taken away from you, doing this and doing that. So it feels really nice to me, as somebody who's been playing these games for a while, to have a game that kind of like is an old sort of throwback to some of those really clean, basic Euro things with some nice card play. There's not a lot of components on the board. You know, I didn't have to punch anything. You know, it's just like everybody has a little handful of wooden tokens. There's a giant deck of cards. Go. And then you got some really good, you know, stuff to kind of chew on. And I'm like, this is really cool. I'm really glad that somebody made a game like this again. Because a lot of games, which I really enjoy, it's like big and sweeping, and there's just crap everywhere on the table, and there's a lot of complexity and intricacies. But this one is so like just polished down, just shaved down to a very smooth nub, and it's good. It's just a really fun game. This is one of those games, because of the abstractness, it's hard to review and express that because it's all just abstract. It's like, oh, I set these card combos and got some points and built a route. I'm not telling you like a thematic story here. So it's hard to review that and go, this is going to be, I think you're really going to like it. But if you're one of those people, you're like, what is he talking about? And you probably turned it off. That's fine. But for those of you that have played some of these older games, some of these more streamlined games and stuff, and have been, I think you know what I'm talking about here. So that's who this is kind of for. And I think if you're not, you know, you don't have a good memory of that kind of stuff as some of these older games like a San Juan or something, or a St. Petersburg, or, you know, I mean, very loosely, and a lot of these games I'm saying are not really like this game, because this game is very different with how it kind of works, but it's in that same sort of overall kind of larger net of these kind of older Euros, like a Tigris and Euphrates, Samurai, Through the Desert, you know, stuff like that. It fits in there, so it feels good. It's like, oh, it's a new game that somebody lost, and then somebody found it and brought it out 15 years later. Really, really cool. A definite high recommend for me. And if you love cards and you love the whole multi-use card thing, which I do, this is easy recommend, easy. So thanks.